Nasozi Kakembo is founder and creative director of XN Studio, a lifestyle brand without borders. What started out as a side hustle is now a global brand of unique African home accents and textiles, now celebrating 10 years in business. With an educational background in architecture and art history, and a career rooted in social impact, Nasozi shares the inspiration behind XN Studio in this week's Glowstream TV Small Business Spotlight. Welcome to Glowstream TV, Nasozi.
Thank you so much, Marquette. I'm excited to speak with you today.
Well, I'm so excited to talk to you today because as a consumer, I am always looking for shops where I can go to spend money and I know that my money is making a difference. And XN Studio really fits that description. Tell me about your business and how not only are you selling beautiful products and items handcrafted, but you're also making a social impact.
Well, thank you for the marvelous introduction. I founded XN Studio in 2011 as a side hustle, quote unquote side hustle, part-time job, a hobby while I was working in the human rights and social justice field. So having a core mission that addressed something social was always an underpinning of the direction of my career. My educational focus was more geared toward the arts. I studied architecture, art history, and Spanish. So I think part of my personality too, like I'm very kind of scientific focused, but then I also have a creative artistic flair. So this brand really, for me, was an outlet to explore all of those different interests and passions and strengths that I cultivated throughout the years. And I just basically pounded the pavement quite literally in Brooklyn, where I was living at the time, and went from all of the different street markets and festivals and had my tent set up in the heat and had my table and my stall and would just kind of hawk pillows on the side of the road, if you will. But it was a very grueling stage, but it was a really exciting stage because I got to meet people face to face. Some of those people still see and recognize me when I am in Brooklyn. They still follow me on my social media platforms. And it feels like a little community, even though the customer base has grown and grown. But that's really where I got my start, was like in the streets of Brooklyn, literally.
I love it. And now, 10 years later, you are celebrating a milestone anniversary in your business, and you are truly a global brand because you mentioned Brooklyn. I know you travel the East Coast and in Africa to meet with artisans, work with them on designing your collection, and travel between the different countries as well to see what's hot in the artisan markets in Africa.
That's correct. Yeah, so I had been traveling to Africa, primarily East Africa to Uganda for many years already, because that's where my father's side of the family is from. And I was always bringing gifts back from the souvenir market or different crafts and bringing gifts back for friends and family here in the United States. So it didn't actually occur to me until, I don't know, 10 or 15 years later that I could actually formulate a business out of, these incredible crafts that people were really appreciative to have when I brought back and gifted them. And some of the items people had never experienced or had before or seen before. So it was a really unique opportunity to extend part of my Ugandan heritage with my heritage, or to my heritage here in the United States, and to my friends and family here. And that's really been for me the fundamental driver, because I am a bridge between the two cultures. I am kind of that personified. And it's really important to me to kind of educate and demystify a lot of the misconceptions that reside in both places about one another. And so the kind of cultural and craft and home aspect really facilitates and it broaches that conversation. So that's one of the main pieces of why I do what I do and what excites me about this brand.
Absolutely. It's exciting to see the beautiful designs in your shop, but you also have a blog on your website where you post pictures of some of the artisans you worked with. You post pictures of you at a market in Africa, and it's so cool to see and then be able to have the opportunity to buy something and you're like, I know exactly where this came from. It's not this
Yeah.
big conglomerate and faceless and nameless person. It's Nasozi Kakembo, and she has
Yeah.
pictures and her artisans look happy.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's interesting because a lot of those pictures predated the company. But I've always been a shutterbug. Like as soon as we had telephones, even before we had telephones, but as soon as we had phones that could take aesthetically pleasing and high quality pictures, I was photographing everything. And so a lot of times I'm just like kind of going back through the archives, the photographic archives, if you will, and rediscovering my story. Like, oh, wow, I was doing that in 2005, long before. But those were the beginnings and the seedlings of what would become a bigger story. But this is very much the way that my spirit and my interests have always been aligned.
And you mentioned that you traveled to Uganda because you have family ties there. But through XN Studio, you've been able to travel to multiple African nations and meet with artisans and pour into their local economy by buying their goods and bringing them here. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so my father is Ugandan, my mother is African American, and I was born and raised in the DC area. And my mother was very involved in the diplomatic scene, the ambassadorial scene, particularly of African ambassadors and the wives of the African ambassadors when it was a wife. Of course, the ambassador is sometimes female as well. But she was part of an organization that really facilitated and welcomed and really brought into the fold the wives of the African ambassadors into the African American community here in the Washington, D.C. area. And so, by virtue of that, my mother has connections from all over Africa. I mean, there's almost not a single country that she doesn't have, some very close connection to. And when I was a kid, she would just drag me to all of the events. And so I also got to establish and form relationships indirectly, albeit indirectly, but with a lot of the people who are coming from other countries, whether it be for the 4-year term or beyond. But a lot of those relationships my mother maintained and really opened my eyes to more than Uganda, within the context of just being curious and wanting to learn more about Africa, about African history, about the textiles, as a particular lens as well. So that said, I've worked with artisans in Ghana. One of my aunts actually relocated full time to Ghana about 25 years ago and set up an art institute there. So I studied but in a batik intensive at her institute about 3 years ago.
And what is
And
what is batik for those listening and
yeah,
watching and don't know?
yeah. So batik is a wax resist dye process. It's similar to tie dye, but you actually make any design of your liking in wax first, on a plain piece of cotton, and then in different layers and a rinsing process, you add dimension and you add colors to that textile. So it's extremely time consuming. At a minimum, there are 10 distinct steps that it takes to produce any piece of batik cloth. But the results are absolutely astounding, and they're slightly different and unique each time. And so it's as rewarding as it is grueling, but it takes a lot of work. But I really wanted to understand the process behind it so that I had a fuller appreciation for what it takes to produce batik. And now I have an actual expert doing it, but I know, full stop, really, how hard he works to bring my ideas and our ideas and craft to the fore and to the world.
That's amazing. And I read that you have worked with more than 50 artisans across more than a half dozen countries in Africa, working with them to buy textiles, home goods, woodwork, things for XN Studio that people here in the US can see beautifully photographed on your website, but then
Thank you.
also support in a way that is like no other. When you talk about how your mother left an impression on you as a child, I know that you're a mother as well. You're running this business full time. And how amazing it must be for your son to see his mom running a global brand through the pandemic and 9 years prior to that.
Yeah, it's as soon as you say that, it kind of reminds me of some funny times where he would be at these markets with me. He was about 2 years old when I founded the company and really, got into the market scene in Brooklyn, and he would be there with me. And there was one time where he had the pillow, and he had a pillow, and he was just running around with the pillow and saying, "Pillows for sale, pillows for sale." And I tell him that story now that he's 12, and he's like, "No, I didn't do that. I didn't do that." I'm like, yes, you did. Yes. So, it's always been something that I've wanted to expose him to, just really coming up with an idea and believing in your idea and making something out of it. Now that he's older, I can kind of show him and expose him to and get him involved in some of the business operation aspects. But he's always been a first person observer, a front row seat observer to the day in and day out. He's been there when I've, had to be making the pillows for a market. He's been there when I've, been visiting and taking samples to different stores in Brooklyn. And now he gets to see, especially now in the past year or so, when kids have been learning from home, parents have been working from home, they get to see what our day is, a day in the life of our parents at work. And sometimes it's stressful, and sometimes it's like back-to-back calls. And he just gets to appreciate all of the variations of what it means to be an entrepreneur and a small business owner. And so that's another part of the drivers for me, is to show him and demonstrate to him that you have more than one path. He's also seen me in the 9 to 5. He knows that I, have completed up to my graduate studies and worked in different prominent institutions since then. And I'm a small business owner. It doesn't have to be one or the other. We can be more than one thing. We don't have to, really confine ourselves to any one box or label.
You can be more than one thing. And in today's world, where balancing act and corporate life are almost mutually exclusive, I want people to know not only can they shop at your store, but they can go to you for inspiration and empowerment because you have the blog on there. You're sharing your story on Glowstream TV. Anything is possible when you write your own song, so to speak. And that's what's so empowering when I listen to you.
Well, thank you, Marquette. Thank you.
So for people who want to find out more about you, Nasozi Kakembo, founder and creative director of XN Studio, where can they find that information, and where can they go and look at all of the beautiful designs in your collection?
Yeah, so you can follow along the journey on Instagram at XN Studio _, and you can find all of the wonderful goodies on my website, xnasozistudio.com, and my blog that Marquette has generously referenced, is on there as well.
Thank you so much for joining us, and best of luck in the next 10 years of your business.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much, Marquette. It's been great speaking with you.
To have your product, service, or business featured as one of the Glow brands, contact us at info@glowstreamtv.com. And don't forget to follow, like, and subscribe to our social media channels at Glowstream TV.